Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, where you'll hear highly accomplished and fascinating guests talk about the challenges they've overcome and the winning mindsets that have led them to great success. And now your host, Dr. Bob.
Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. Today, my guest is Joel Gilbert, a Los Angeles-based filmmaker who Wikipedia says is a musician, filmmaker, and conspiracy theorist. We're going to explore each of those professions with him today. First, as a musician. While Joel was in high school in the mid-'80s, he was inspired to learn guitar after listening to a Bob Dylan album. Years later, Joel founded and is still the lead singer of a band called Highway 61 Revisited, which performs Bob Dylan songs. Now, I've heard Joel perform, singing, playing guitar, and harmonica, all at the same time, one guy, and it's uncanny how close he comes to the real deal. Next, as a filmmaker, Joel has produced 16 films, mainly documentaries that have a wide range of topics, from covering pop musicians to problems in the Middle East to American politics. It's his political documentaries that have reached the widest audiences, mainly because each provides a very different and often disturbing story about various celebrities that the mainstream media presents. It was these works that led Wikipedia and others to label him as a conspiracy theorist. We're going to explore two of those documentaries, Dreams from My Real Father, which he produced in 2012, and the Trayvon Hoax, which he produced in 2019. Following that, Joel will give us a preview into his upcoming new book and film featuring Michelle Obama. Joel is a very smart, detailed, and objective guy. He is passionate about investigating complex matters and exposing the truth, no matter what the consequences to him may be. Joel, it's a pleasure to welcome you, for you to be here with us tonight. And let's start with one of your most recent films.
Okay, well, great to be here. Thanks, Dr. Bob. You talked about, of course, Dreams from My Real Father. That was the 2012 documentary that I produced and also disseminated very widely before Obama's re-election campaign. And this, of course, drew the interest of the FEC, who investigated me for putting it out, as well as a number of detractors. But this film was based on my investigation of Barack Obama's background, because he ran in 2008 really as a mainstream candidate. He said he was going to follow the Constitution, bring the country together, he would support Israel, very much a mainstream candidate. But when he took office, we could see there was a huge gap between the reality of his agenda and what he was up to than how he portrayed himself. A lot of his portrayal was based on his autobiography called Dreams from My Father, where he portrayed himself as a kid growing up in Hawaii who suffered discrimination and wanted to find his real roots from some so-called African father. And I read that book because there was such a gap in what Obama was saying and doing in office versus what the media was telling us and what his book told us. So I read Dreams from My Father. And I saw that he kept referring to this guy named Frank, who I read was Frank Marshall Davis, who is really the star of the book. It's not the Kenyan father that he never met or saw one time when he was 10 years old for 2 days. He talks about Frank really raising him in Hawaii, quoting him even after Frank dies. Everywhere Obama goes, to Harvard, to Chicago, he's always quoting Frank. So I said, well, who's this Frank guy?
And if I'm correct,
Yeah.
he mentions or refers to Frank more than 50, 75 times in the book.
That's right. Now, in the audio version...
In his own book.
This is the book right here, Dreams from My Father. So in the audio version of the book that Obama put out, that he actually does the voiceover, Frank Marshall Davis is scrubbed. He's not in the audio book. So I thought something was up with this, and I went and I bought Frank Marshall Davis, wrote an autobiography called Livin' the Blues. And I start looking at pictures of Frank Marshall Davis, and it's a spitting image of Barack Obama. I can't believe it. He looks just like him. And I realized the Kenyan Obama looks absolutely nothing like Barack Obama. So that set off a bunch of alarm bells. And when you read Frank Marshall Davis's background, he was in the Communist Party USA out of Chicago. He was one of the original black Bolsheviks. These were the black people that were recruited by the Communist Party, by the white communists in Chicago in the early 30s to try to convince other black people to join the Communist Party. Now, they weren't very successful at the time because at the time, blacks were religious people. They wanted no part of Marxism because it was atheist, and they were religious. They wanted no part of Marxism because it was a class struggle, and they were church-going people. They believed in love thy neighbor. So Frank Marshall Davis was shipped off to Hawaii in 1948 by Comintern. He was ordered to go there by the Communist Party out of Russia to try to assist and start a dock workers strike in Hawaii. This is before statehood, to try to force U.S. naval forces out of Hawaii to take over the state to help with Soviet expansion in Southeast Asia. So Davis went to Hawaii, organized the dock workers strike. It failed, and Hawaii achieved statehood. And Frank Marshall Davis went on to write for the communist newspaper called the Honolulu Record. And he was, interviewed by the House Un-American Activities Committee. He pleaded the Fifth. He was under FBI surveillance for 20 years, and he was documented that he was a Soviet agent during the Cold War. So Obama admittedly is raised by this guy, and I think I presented a mountain of evidence that this, in fact, was Obama's biological father as well, from Chicago, where Obama went back to. His colleague in Chicago for the communist newspapers was Vernon Jarrett, the father-in-law of Valerie Jarrett, small world. A lot of people don't know David Axelrod. Both his parents were communist journalists out of New York. So there's quite a cabal of red diaper babies, we call them, children of Communist Party members. And I've even, after the film came out, I think I spoke to Keith Kakagawa, Obama's best friend, who was in Corcoran State Prison for years. I would go up to the prison and meet with him. He's referred to in Obama's book, and he told me the story of when Obama found out that Davis was his father when he was in high school. So I think I've documented it, and it's very clear that that's the case. The biology is not as important as the fact that Obama emulated the policies and ideology, the far-left radical ideology of Davis. The media covered it up in 2008, biggest scandal, any scandal of the media and the establishment, that this guy was a far-left radical. I think in Dreams from My Real Father, it's an alternate history where I show his entire upbringing. Shows up at Occidental College, 18 years old, and he says he's a revolutionary Marxist. Now, who goes to an exclusive high school, Punahou, in Hawaii and shows up as a Marxist? So I documented the whole thing. Just about everything that Obama says about his history and background is pretty much not true. There's a different story, and I think I told the story.
Of course, there was a lot of controversy about his birth certificate,
right,
that it was never exposed, and then fake birth certificates came
right
out. And what I understand may be the case is that indeed he was born in Hawaii,
yeah,
but that the birth certificate actually says father unknown. And the reason for that, if that's the case, was that Frank Marshall Davis was married at the time, so he couldn't have been legally or legitimately the father of Barack Obama.
That's correct. That's what my information has. It was father was unknown. It was obviously would have been a big scandal anyway at that time for young girls to have children out of wedlock. And I think they recruited the Kenyan student who was married with kids in Kenya simply to be the front man, to pretend to be the father. There's never been a wedding certificate found. When Obama was, the first 2 years of his life was in Seattle. There was no Obama family. Ann Dunham took him to Hawaii as an infant. Took him to Seattle as an infant and only came back to Hawaii a couple years later. The Kenyan was long gone at Harvard. So the story of Barack Obama, unfortunately, is the story of the media and Obama fooling the American public, telling the electorate something that wasn't true. And when he took office, he threw the electorate under the bus and pursued a radical agenda that no one voted for. And I think I've documented this quite well. And unfortunately, that agenda is still playing out today.
Fantastic investigative efforts. Thank you. Also, another rather important story in American life is that of Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
And the general or the media story is that he was just going out shopping, and all of a sudden he was attacked and killed by this other individual, white or Puerto Rican fellow, and that led, I think, to the initial formation of Black Lives Matter. So, tell us tell us the common story,
Sure.
Which is a cover story, and then tell us what you
Right.
believe the facts are.
That's both a book and a movie version, which it came out with in 2019. And, the official story, which most people you stop on the street, they'll say that a neighborhood vigilante, watch captain, tracked and executed a child because of his skin color, who posed no threat to him. That's kind of the official story that was promoted by the family attorney at the time, Benjamin Crump, that the media ran with. The reality is, of course, that if you watch the trial or you've seen my movie and the book, the reality is of what happened was Trayvon Martin was kicked out of his house by his mother, Sabrina Fulton, for the third time, for being suspended for the third time, was put on a bus to go hang out with his father 250 miles away. His father was not supervising him. He was staying at the home of his girlfriend, and he was out drugging and doing drugs with his friends. George lived in this community that had been burglarized. George Zimmerman burglarized quite a bit, and the police had told the neighborhood watch group, they said, look, if you see anybody suspicious, all these break-ins, better be safe than sorry, call the non-emergency number. So I interviewed Zimmerman in the film and did my own research, and he explained that he was simply going to Target. There was no such thing as a neighborhood watch or a patrol. He was in his car going to Target to get some food, and he saw Trayvon, what looked like a tall man, 6'3", standing between two buildings in the rain, not trying to get out of the rain. So he just pulled over and called the non-emergency number, and they said, yeah, there's someone standing here. I don't know what he's doing. He's not trying to get out of the rain. And they said, well, we'll send the police over. And that's when Trayvon actually approached Zimmerman and circled his car. And Zimmerman's on the phone saying, yeah, this guy's circling the car. I don't know if he's got something in his pocket. I don't know
And
what he's
these are
doing.
recordings that are still
On
available.
911. You can go
Right.
on YouTube and hear it. And then Trayvon goes away, and the dispatcher keeps saying, well, where'd he go? Where'd he go? So Zimmerman asked him, well, why'd you get out of your car? He said, I felt obligated because the dispatcher kept asking me where he went. So I just started walking along. And then they said, well, are you following him? And he said, yes. And I said, George, why'd you say yes? He said, I didn't mean I was following him. I was just going in the direction I last saw him. He says, I never saw him at all during that time. So Zimmerman then tells the dispatcher, I'm going back to my car. 10 feet away from the car, Trayvon appears and sucker punches him. Just from the very location of the altercation, you know that Zimmerman wasn't following him around. It was next to the guy's car. He was trying to get back in his car. And so Trayvon, beats the crap out of him, straddles him, MMA style. A neighbor came out and said he was being beaten MMA style. George has got a broken nose, bleeding, is choking on his own blood. He screamed, you can hear on 911 calls, 14 times he screamed for help. The neighbor comes out and tells Trayvon to get off of him. And George says, get him off of me. He says, no, I'm going to go call the police. And George says, no, get him off of me. I already called the police. Get him off of me. And so the guy goes back in his apartment, and George said that Trayvon went for he forgot he had a gun on him. All that time he's being beat up. He pulled out his gun and fired one shot to try to get Trayvon off of him. And Trayvon actually said to George, this was never publicized except for in the movie, he said to George, tell Mom Alicia I'm sorry, admitting he knew that he did wrong. Mom Alicia was his stepmother that raised him for 16 years. So after that, the Sanford Police Department investigated this, all of George's injuries, the eyewitnesses, 911 calls. They exonerated Zimmerman, self-defense, see you later, it's over. Pure self-defense case. And that's when Benjamin Crump showed up with Al Sharpton with the encouragement of the Justice Department and said, well, we don't trust the Sanford police. We want to do our own investigation. George Floyd, we don't trust the autopsy. We wanted to get our own other autopsy. They might be racist. We want the FBI to investigate. And they started pressuring and doing demonstrations. And then Crump showed up at a press conference 2 days later, and he held up a digital recorder. He said, I just talked to Trayvon's girlfriend. We found her phone number last night on the phone records. Her name is Diamond Eugene. She's 16 years old. It's puppy love. They're in love. And he played a couple excerpts, and it kind of sounded like she was saying some things a little different from what the police said, kind of was mimicking what Crump had said. And so Crump said, we've got all the evidence now. And so that playing of that recording of 16-year-old Diamond Eugene pressured Obama to say, hey, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
And by the way, the pictures that were in the media at the time, just when Obama said, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, they were pictures of a 9-year-old kid.
Correct.
I think.
A 9-year-old kid.
A 9-year-old kid in 5th grade or something like that.
If you saw that, you'd be sympathetic.
You'd be sympathetic.
Yeah.
Whereas the real picture of what Trayvon had become is a thug.
Well, look, he was 6'3", he was 17, he was doing a lot of drugs, he was selling guns. His mother couldn't handle him. She was kicking him out of the house. He kept getting suspended. That's the real story, is the parenting deficiency. And the parents made George Zimmerman the racial scapegoat for their parenting deficiency. Much the same as Democrats today, they have a deficiency of policies. In Democrat-run cities and states, they have high unemployment, high taxes, drug cultures in urban America, black community, single motherhood, crime and violence. So instead of saying, hey, I guess our policies don't work, they make a racial scapegoat. For Democrats, the racial scapegoat is America. It's the system. The system is racist. That's why our policies fail. Just like the Martin family made George Zimmerman the racial scapegoat for their parenting problems. So the state of Florida appointed a special prosecutor. They were pressured into it. And they came down to Miami to interview 16-year-old Diamond Eugene. It's puppy love, you know? And
no, but what could she have possibly said on the phone that was going to clarify this matter?
What Crump played at the press conference didn't clarify anything. It was just a few statements. So that's why the prosecutors had to go and interview 16-year-old Diamond Eugene. So they pick up Sabrina Fulton at her house. They say, do you know where she lives? She says, yes, she came to my house.
Sabrina? Go back
Sabrina
in.
Fulton's Trayvon's mother.
Trayvon's mother, okay.
Prosecutor shows up. She says, yeah, she was at my house last week, and I drove her home and spoke to her mother. I'll take you to her house. So she drives the cops, prosecutors with Crumps there, to the home of Diamond Eugene, 16-year-old high school kid. And when they get there, they're told that she's not there, and they send her away to a house of a woman who works for Trayvon's mother. They get to that house, and 18-year-old Rachel Gentile shows up, 350 pounds. She's 2 years older and 150 pounds heavier than Trayvon. They interview her. She says, well, I'm not really his girlfriend. I lied about my name. I lied about my age. I said it was raining that night, but it's not raining. They said, how many text messages did you send Trayvon that day? She said, 1.
Wait a minute. So she is the Diamond girl? There are two different girls?
Two different girls.
I'm confused.
So what happened is they substituted Rachel Gentile, 18-year-old girl with, obvious, she's a mental disability. She's in a program for kids with all kind of mental problems at school. She's been kicked out of school. She's 18 years old. Now, so what I did is I realized, listening to the recording of Diamond Eugene talking to Crump, the voice is a completely different girl, a different name, a different age, a different voice.
But a different name. It's a different name. So why did they pay attention to her now?
It's incredible. Then they do this interview with Rachel Gentile. Says, I'm 18. I lied about my name. I lied about my age. I lied about going to the hospital. She says, I lied about everything. And they go ahead and use her statements to arrest Zimmerman. Without that interview with Rachel Gentile, there would have been no arrest of Zimmerman, there'd be no trial, there'd be no Black Lives Matter. So what I did is I said, look, I think there really is a Diamond Eugene, 16 years old. And if I can find her and I can find the reason they switched her and who knew about it, I'll make a film and write a book. And that's what I did. The real Diamond Eugene, she's in the movie, and I exposed the entire thing. Ben Crump was in on it. Sabrina Fulton was in on it. They all knew about it. The prosecutors, the FBI, there's no way they didn't know that this was a different person. The text messages reveal everything. I have the text.
Well, what evidence, even if it was falsified, what evidence did they present that convinced somebody to have a trial here now?
Look, they were under tremendous pressure. Black people were not in the tank for Barack Obama in 2012. Everything had gotten worse in urban America. Unemployment was higher. Illegals coming and taking jobs, driving down wages. Obama did nothing for black people. So they needed something to galvanize black voters to come out for Obama again. And this was the vehicle that they used. And they'd been preparing for this. The DOJ was highly racialized during Eric Holder's years. They hired 1,000 attorneys from SPLC and La Raza to join turn the DOJ.
Radical leftist organization.
DOJ became a social justice department.
Got it.
So they were looking for something to exacerbate. Al Sharpton was in on it. So the prosecutors in Florida had no choice. So Rachel Jeantel, they took a couple of her statements and used that. And they also took Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon's mother. They took her statement that the voice on the phone of the person screaming for help, which was George Zimmerman, was her son. That was in the indictment, because the mother of the victim said that her son was screaming for help, even though the eyewitness said her son was on top beating the crap out of the guy. So there was no rational justification for it. The prosecution withheld all this evidence from the defense till just before the trial. For example, I have 750-page cell phone records of Trayvon's cell phone. There's pictures of Diamond Eugene texting Trayvon. He says, "Send me a picture." She texts him a picture. It's not Rachel Jeantel, it's a different girl. So if I could find this, don't think that the FBI and everybody else didn't have it. They withheld it from the defense till just before the trial. There was a political agenda. They used Trayvon Martin. They used Zimmerman, who was a Democrat, Obama supporter, and created this Black Lives Matter stuff for political purposes. And we've seen they repeated this on hoax after hoax until the George Floyd incident. Same formula. Ben Crump shows up, says, "We don't trust the autopsy. I want a different autopsy. The police are racist." Because of this one incident, it's definitely racism, and therefore all the police are racist. So here's the agenda to change the country and change the world. By the way, give me $20, $30, $50 million while you're at it. That's the formula that they executed, and the media runs with it. The politicians go with it to exploit these incidences. And in the end, a year and a half later, Keith Ellison, the AG of, in Minnesota, he said on 60 Minutes a couple months ago, he said, no, it was nothing racial about it. Derek Chauvin didn't have any racial animus. It was basically an accident, had to do with George Floyd taking too much drugs. Chauvin, it looked bad. It looked like he sat on him for a little too long, but there was no intent to kill him, and there was no racism. So they take these accidents, which there will be. I mean, every day there's thousands of arrests. 15% are drug-related. A lot of guys are on probation, and they fight the police. When they fight the police, something once or twice a day, someone might get killed. Sometimes the police officer gets killed. So this is BLM was founded on because George Zimmerman was acquitted. So we're still living with this today.
So went to trial, full trial, in front of a jury.
Zimmerman's exonerated again.
Exonerated.
Second time, but
not a hung jury, right?
No. Unanimous, including a black juror.
Yeah.
And they said, just like the police concluded, this guy is innocent. It was pure self-defense. So they've politicized these, situations that are not political to exploit and use the narratives to manipulate mostly black voters to turn out because of racism. Everything's racist. And it's a tragic turn politically, and we're still living with now 24 hours of anti-racism and critical race theory, mostly based on these hoaxes as rationalization.
Tremendous story. Now, how long did it take you to do the research on Trayvon Martin?
It took me, I mostly was going through Trayvon's cell phone records, trying to identify Diamond Eugene. Once I found the photos of her, I went out to Miami, Florida, and that's part of the movie is I take you on that journey of investigation with me. I go to Miami, I go to the high schools, and I get these yearbooks, and I try to find her. I go and talk to Zimmerman, and then I find Diamond Eugene, ironically, at the University of Florida in Tallahassee, studying criminal justice of all things, and I meet her and I interview her, and we find out through her Twitter account, she actually tweeted live every 20 minutes during that time in 2012. She was tweeting about, she was on the phone with Trayvon. She's tweeting about it. So we had her Twitter account, slam dunk. So that's the real girlfriend. And they switched her for this. They took advantage of Rachel Jeantel, who's never been the same. She was in bad shape then, but she put on another 200 pounds. She hasn't left her house in years. The trauma of having to go through the trial with her disabilities, I think she was taken advantage of because of her disabilities.
What was the purpose or the intent of switching those two women?
Here's what happened is Diamond Eugene had a boyfriend at the time. Her and Trayvon was like a second relationship she had. She didn't want her boyfriend to find out that she was two-timing him with Trayvon. He found out anyway, and that's documented on his Twitter account as well. And also, she didn't want to lie to the police. It was one thing. She was pressured into that phone call with Benjamin Crump. I had all the phone records. She was pressured by Trayvon's scary friends. She was pressured by Trayvon's mother and Crump. She finally capitulated. And in that phone call, I have the entire phone call with Crump. she's just repeating back to Crump whatever he says. He says, was Trayvon scared that night? Yeah. Was he happy throughout the day? Yeah. And he said, why did this happen? She said, it was racial. It was racial. So she's just 16. She's repeating to Crump everything she's supposed to say. So she thinks she's done with it. Now they tell her, you've got to go lie to the police. And she's smart enough, girl, Haitian background. She had a lot of relatives who've been to prison. And I think she knew better than to lie to the police. So she did participate in getting Rachel Jeantel, that turns out that's her half-sister, to substitute. It's a 16-year-old plan. And everybody went along with it. Probably plausible deniability. Well, I don't know. That's who she said she was Diamond Eugene, but turned out to be someone else. So they were all in on it, and they would never have an indictment without Rachel Jeantel pretending to be her half-sister and pretending.
And as you said, you spent your own time, your own money. You're not a private investigator. And you were able to discover these things, these facts and conflicts, the truth. And the FBI or the police couldn't?
FBI,
of course
they did. They had the audio tapes. They had subpoena power that I wish I had. They had everything. I've had police officers who were in Sanford, Florida at the time have contacted me and have seen the film, and they said, we knew Rachel Jeantel was not Diamond Eugene, but the state took it over and we couldn't say anything at that time. So a lot of people knew it. Look, my biggest fans of this movie are black teenagers. They contact me and they say, oh my God, I was afraid to go out of my house. I thought white people wanted to shoot me down the street because of my skin color. One girl said, well, I have a black son and I was afraid for him to grow up in America, but now I realize we got played. She said, thank you. Thank you. But they're the ones that say, look, we knew Rachel wasn't the girlfriend. We knew that, they know what's up. But, we didn't know that she was substituted or something like that. So anyone that watches the film is really opens your eyes as to what the media, how far they will go for their agenda.
And where can people get this film if they want?
On DVD and on the book is on Amazon.com, FlixFling, and YouTube Movies. You can watch the film. It was on Vimeo. I had 10,000 views, pay-per-view, and it got taken down after a couple months for some bogus reasons, unfortunately. But it's widely available.
Good. I'm glad that people can still learn the truth from you. And thank you so much for dedicating the time and effort and the risk. Were you threatened at any point, or did you feel threatened?
No, I never did. I mean, people really appreciate the effort and the work. I'd say the bigger disappointment was I did a speech at the National Press Club. I did a screening of the film when it came out. Biggest disappointment was the biggest conservative talking heads and media types that you see on TV every day. I talked to them personally. I sent them DVDs and book to their houses. Some of them just would never talk to me again. Some of them were honest. They said, I can't touch this because I'll get slammed on social media. This is the mother of all race cases. It's too sensitive. I can't talk about this.
But it's because of the malfeasance of this kind of case that the left-wing media continues to talk about the racist society, continues to use these examples to inflame, to incite more racism against blacks and against whites. And that leads, of course, to the demand for defunding the police, because the police are racist all of a sudden because one cop did something wrong or whatever. Defund the police. And who does that hurt most? It hurts most the people who live in depressed communities where there's tremendous drug and violence. So fewer police won't matter if you're living in Beverly Hills necessarily, but it'll certainly matter if you're living in an inner city.
Yeah, my film, 2014, There's No Place Like Utopia, it's kind of like a Michael Moore film for conservatives. I run around to Chicago and Detroit and talk to a lot of black people in these urban communities. And a lot of black women, they're the biggest conservatives in the country. They don't want any part of legalizing marijuana. They want more police. They want more safety. They don't want illegals coming in and taking their jobs. I mean, and then I would say, well, why did you vote for, you like Obama? Yeah. And I said, well, why did you vote for him if he's against all those things that you believe in? They'd say, oh, you got a point, because they get sucked into the racial thing. And people like Obama know that. And they'll use that. The media uses that. Trump did much, much more for minorities, for jobs, for prison reform, you name it. than Obama did. Why is that? I don't think Obama ever cared or did anything for the black community other than alleging racism and getting their votes.
Mm-hmm. Another very relevant topic today is COVID vaccines and mandates. And I believe it's another move by the government to take control over our lives. It seems that every day, every month, every week, that the freedoms that we have are being slowly eroded like rust on iron. And although you haven't yet investigated COVID or COVID mandates, I'm sure you have an opinion about these.
Yeah, well, first of all, I can allude back to what you introduced me earlier, that concept of conspiracy theory. Anytime there's an official narrative, such as Barack Obama, I'm going to bring the country together because of my unique background. My father's from Africa, my mother's from Kansas. I'll bring us all together, Or in this case, well, these vaccines are going to, are totally safe and they're going to stop the pandemic. So if you have any opinion or ask a question that is contrary to the narrative, you're dismissed as essentially conspiracy theorist, means a crazy person. In the Soviet Union, they would use psychiatric hospitals and medications. Like if you don't agree with communism, state owning all your property and no private property, and then you must be nuts. So that's kind of a form of it, charging someone having a conspiracy theory. Now it takes about a year or so later, maybe the virus did come out of a lab,
in China, matter of fact.
Yeah, and maybe.
And you remember how Trump was mistreated when he called it the China virus, right. The China flu?
Right. And it turns out it's not really a vaccine. We find out it's a temporary immunity booster. Mm-hmm. A vaccination means it's something that you're going to be immune to something. It's not the case. So it takes months and months and years for people that ask questions to get people to pay attention and realize that there's a different story. And I think Americans have learned quite a lot. I've seen the bar has moved a great deal. When I came out with Dreams from My Real Father in 2012, even conservatives would say, well, you're saying Obama's not who he says he is, and how can this be true if CNN hasn't covered it, if Fox hasn't covered it, And now I saw the bar move that years later, it's like, well, of course, it must be true because CNN is not covering it. So the bar has moved quite a bit, but we've gotten to the point. When I was in the Soviet Union in 1984, I visited dissidents for 2 weeks who were trying to leave the Soviet Union, and they were telling me how all the Soviet news, Pravda, and the newspapers were 100% lies, and then I saw the guy pick up and was reading the Pravda newspaper. I said, why are you reading the newspaper? You told me it was all lies. He said, well, that's how we get our news. We read the newspaper. We know whatever they say, the opposite is true. And that's how we get our news. So CNN, if you watch CNN, it's like living under Soviet occupation. Everything they say is the opposite. That's how you can get your news.
It's an upside-down world.
That's what communism is. It's upside-down world. Everything is backwards.
But, the left and our current administration can say, well, we're not forcing anybody to get an injection because that would clearly be somehow against human rights, against the Constitution, to tie people down in a chair and to inject something into their body. I think 100% of Americans would agree that would be wrong. So what they're doing instead is saying, no, you don't have to get the injection, but you just can't get on a public transportation. You just can't have a job. And it's going to be, I think, the department of the government that deals with workplace safety.
Right. OSHA.
OSHA deals with workplace safety. That has to do with the kind of machinery that's used, the automation machinery, or perhaps live wires here and there. OSHA has no say over people getting injected with a vaccine, and a failure to do that means you're threatening that you're violating workplace safety. But that's how they're going to be using. They're going to be using administrative rules as opposed to laws. They're not going to pass a law that you have to be vaccinated, but all these departments will pass their own rules and regulations.
Right. Look, this has been a pipe dream of the radical left since the 20s, 30s, 60s, that they can control everybody somehow. It was a fantasy. No one believed it could ever come to pass. But with this health issue and safety, you got to be safe.
Fear. Getting the population to be fearful. I mean, I live in a suburban area. Houses are far apart, yet I still see people outside wearing a mask.
I see people driving alone in a car wearing a mask.
Right.
You know, so under the guise of self-appointed,
You protect me, I'll protect you. That's
the government has appointed themselves as safety czars. They want to make you safe to use it to implement all these policies and agendas that nobody ever voted for, and it's coming in, crossing every facet of the economy. Evictions, for example. They've essentially seized 5 million apartments and homes from people that own them and given them away for free
to the tenants.
To the tenants who, will probably are getting unemployment and other benefits and will most likely be voting Democrat. So I think the game plan is to exacerbate and exaggerate. The hospitals are full. Every time there's any COVID anything, exaggerate it, exacerbate it, at least through the winter so that they can keep the COVID voting rules in place like we just had for the California recall election. They sent out 21 million ballots to everybody unsolicited, no chain of custody, drop boxes all over the place. So they want to keep those mail-in rules in place for 2022 to get a Democrat sweep of the Senate and House. And they'll just say everybody, I guess is against Trump, and they want to give their approval. And then they'll pass that H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which will permanently make these COVID voting rules where you can vote online,
ballots, right.
vote by mail. I've read that thing. It's 500 pages, by the way. Everyone should read it.
I read the summary, and the summary was made me sick. When I saw convicted felons are going to be able to vote. I mean,
it's worse. What you don't realize is it makes it illegal to challenge anyone's voter registration. If you challenge the voter registration,
you broke the law.
You broke the law. You can go to jail for challenging someone's registration.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it's all in there. Don't think they haven't covered everything. Now, when you read that, this means 20 million Chinese could register to vote from China using vacant lots in swing states, register, and
you couldn't question.
And they could vote. Anyone that questions it could be open to go to jail. No one's going to question it. So it completely removes the sovereignty of the American people from the voting process.
I understand it. And if not for the COVID rules, then mail-in ballots wouldn't have happened in the 2020 election.
Correct.
They used that. They said, no, we don't want people to line up to go to the voting polls. Yeah. It'll be dangerous. So they used that. They used the fear of COVID to change the voting rules that we can send out mail-in ballots where there's no chain of custody. And it's quite likely, in many people's view, that election was that the results were fraudulent.
Yeah, look, no serious person believes that Biden got 81 million votes, that these 5 Democrat counties stopped their voting for 5 or 6 hours, and then suddenly Biden got hundreds of thousands of votes and Trump got none. But I believe it's almost like, et tu brute. It's like everybody was in on it. Fox News was calling Arizona early. Everybody made sure that this could not be questioned. I think if you look at Biden's candidacy, it made no sense from the beginning. This guy's 77. He can barely put 2 sentences together. He's got no support. He's losing everything. He wins one primary and everybody drops out. I think the fix was in for Biden, that this was the plan all along, for Biden to be this front man for the radical left agenda that Obama was in on for 8 years. They resisted as best they could for 4 years. And this was the plan to get Biden in there. I think he and Kamala are simply placeholders.
Placeholders. And I recall an interview that Barack Obama did with Stephen Colbert in the end of 2020.
Okay.
And Colbert asked him, if you could run for a third term, if that was legal in our system, which it's not, would you do it? And he thought about it, and his answer was very revealing. He said, well, what I prefer to do is to be basically the puppet master. He didn't use those terms, but he said, I'd rather be at home in my sweats, writing the script, and then dictating it into someone's earpiece for them to say, so that he would be in charge, but not be responsible for delivering the message. And I believe that's what's happening now. I believe that Barack Obama, this Biden term is really Obama 3.0.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think that just like the Clintons, the Obamas are never going away. I think that Barack is probably chomping at the bit to get back in the White House in some manner. And he's probably quite jealous. In 2008, he couldn't open the border. He had to run for re-election in 2012. In his second term, became very radical. He did the Iranian nuclear deal. He was doing all kind of things that were considered very radical and divisive. But he couldn't go over the top because he wanted Hillary to get in. So he's probably quite jealous that now the media is completely in the tank and you can get away with anything. So he'd love to be part of it. And I think that what happened is, and what is happening is, that not only Obama, I think there's about 4 or 5 main interest groups that are behind Biden. He's kind of the front man for these different interests. One of them is the Democrat Party, deep state, CIA, FBI, China, globalists. There's different groups of people that have interests that came together to make sure
now it
Biden
sounds
was
like
elected.
a conspiracy, but it doesn't have to be that these 20 people get together in secret and plot. It's that they all have the same goal. They don't have to plot together. If you remember Star Trek, there's the Borg, and once you are part of the Borg, you have all the information necessary. You don't have to communicate anymore. So
look, Trump was an existential threat to all the groups I just mentioned, to the Chinese economy, to the Democrat Party. Trump was attracting minorities. That's the basis of the Democrat Party. Black people were realizing how much better
I remember him saying when he gave a speech, I think it was in Detroit, some inner city, and he talked about how for the past 50 years, under Democrat control, that nothing's changed. It's still horrible. If anything changed, it got worse. And he looked at the audience and he said, vote for me. What have you got to lose?
Right, and they were realizing that. So that was an existential threat to the Democrat Party. So when I talked about these interest groups, they realized that a second Trump term would be the end of their story. China was going to go downhill economically. FBI, CIA, Trump wasn't going to put up with more of this interference in the civilian electoral process. NATO, everybody that Trump was holding accountable realized that Trump's second term would be an existential threat. I think they came together in a loose way to make sure that Biden, of all people, became the most popular person in the country, along with Kamala, who couldn't even make the first primary before she had to drop out.
She's never won any election in her life.
Correct. It's always been appointments, and well, she won, no contest in California as a, Democrat Senate candidate and so forth. But that kind of leads me to talk about my new project. Is I'm looking very closely into Michelle Obama, because I think she is going to be the 2024 presidential candidate for the Democrats.
Why do you think that?
Well, I'll list the reasons. Obviously, she was the keynote speaker at the Democrat virtual convention in 2020. The keynote speaker is the person that introduces the candidate. That person is always pretty much designated as the next nominee. Barack Obama, same thing. He introduced John Kerry, was the keynote speaker, and Obama became the next nominee. Michelle is also following Barack's formula. Barack based his political career and his candidacy on his life story, The Dreams of My Father. Michelle wrote this. She came out with her autobiography, Becoming, 2018, her whole life story. And in this book, which I've read several times, she's perfect. Everything she does is perfect. She's either the heroine or the victim in most situations. You can see what she's doing as setting up her candidacy. She went on a book tour with this thing all over the world. If you look at her Twitter account, she's got 24 million followers. All she does is politics all day. She just did a video with Stacey Abrams about voter suppression and passing the H.R. 1. She's all political. She's a very political person her entire life. Once I read her book, I did a deep dive into Michelle's real background and found out that just like Barack, everything that we're told officially about her, she hates politics, she was discriminated against, she suffered because of her skin color and was held back. All these things that Michelle has led people to believe are simply not true. So I'm still researching and working on it, and I think later this year, early next year, I'm going to come out with a film and probably a book that really tells what her real history is. Her family it was a very political family. Her father was a precinct captain. Her uncle was worked for the planning commission in Chicago, met Jacqueline Kennedy, and she was always heavily involved in politics. But you'll find out that her story is just so different than what people think. And she's really, Barack and Michelle are two sides of the same coin. They both have a phony story and a hidden agenda.
When is that going to be available, Joel?
I'm hoping early next year. Just look at Michelle's Instagram, 46 million followers. Facebook, 20 million. The most popular woman in the world. She got $10 billion in free earned media, covers of magazines, all positive earned media. You know, you could be...
Based on what accomplishments? What?
The main accomplishment, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama had no accomplishments of significant note at all. Barack Obama ran for president. The only thing significant about him was that he was biracial. That was it. It was his skin color that made him interesting to people.
Not white, but not too black.
Well, look, at the time he was being accused by Don Trotter and others of being a white man in blackface. He grew up in a white family. He didn't have any black friends. His girlfriends were white or Asian. His friends were Pakistani. He didn't have any black experience. Michelle Obama, ironically, actually is not from Southside Chicago. She's from South Shore, which is southeast. She says she likes to say, the only thing you need to know about me is I'm from the South Side. She's not from the South Side. She went and got, every time she had a chance to go and be educated with other blacks, she ran away. Her brother went to an exclusive parochial school, $3,500 a year, white Catholic school. Instead of going to the all black high school near where they lived, he went to a white high school. Michelle, same thing. She's always running away from situations where she could be educated in her neighborhood with black people. She would go to a white high school. And she went to Princeton. When she later came back to Chicago, she moved to Hyde Park. Now she lives in Martha's Vineyard. So there's a whole story about Michelle that really doesn't have very much of a black experience at all, even though her skin color is black. But the experience of Black America is something that she really didn't experience, and neither did Barack Obama. And white people tend to think because of their skin color, they have the black, community has some affinity for them. The biggest problem that Barack Obama had in 2007, Michelle Obama tried to help him with, is that black people weren't going to vote for him. They didn't think he was authentic. He was an elitist, Harvard, from Hawaii, grew up in a white family. They weren't buying into the candidacy at all. So Michelle, tried to really put on all this stuff about suffering from racism to try to get black people to identify with them. She also dressed down. It's very funny. She was a very elegant person. She was voted International Best Dress List 2004, 2006. She was into all these fashion designers, Maria Pinto, Ikram Goldman in Chicago. 2007, she shows up on the campaign trail dressed like a homeless person, and she doesn't comb her hair. And so she was intentionally trying to make people think, well, she's just another tired mom. It's hilarious. I'm going to show it in the film. You can just see her dressing like a hobo on the campaign trail to try to make people think that she was not an elitist, but she was an elite political family, Harvard graduate. Very funny. And Becoming, in the book, you'd think if you went to Harvard Law School, you would be proud of it. This is what she writes about going to Princeton. And then she says, I went to the best law school I could find, and then I moved back to Chicago. She's trying to hide the elitism, but they still moved to Martha's Vineyard to hang out with the Kennedys and the Carries, and so I think that really shows their true colors. There's a big story that I'm going to be telling.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I really look forward to both. Which is going to come out first, the book or the movie?
Simultaneous.
Simultaneous release.
Yeah.
Well, you have accomplished a tremendous amount, Joel. In music and theater and investigations and in these reports. When I look at Joel's accomplishments, I see that achieving them required a large number of different personality traits. And that's part of the reason why we're doing Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, to not only entertain people who may be watching, but also to point out to them the difficulties, the hurdles that people had to overcome to achieve success, and the personality traits. And the personality traits that I see in you are very clear. Intelligence, the ability to look deeply into a topic and focus on the important matters. Next, passion. You really have a passion for what you're doing, and that's what it takes to continue to be able to focus, and that means perseverance, the ability to take on tough problems and work hard on them over a long period of time without giving up. Also, I see in your work objectivity. You come into the question, into the problem with, well, that doesn't seem quite right. There's a sense of skepticism. When you hear this story and that story, you're skeptical. But that doesn't mean you're trying to prove that something else was wrong or something that they say was wrong was right. You don't go in with a predetermined end of the story. You are truly objective, and that is so hard to do, and that is what we're truly missing in reporters today, and editors and journalists: objectivity. Most of them are hired with a particular point of view. They're hired by the New York Times. If you don't have this point of view, we're not going to hire you anyway. And so they're screened for that, and they see everything through that lens, not through an objective lens.
I'll agree with you on all that. Look, here's a good point: is the COVID-19 is probably the biggest international disaster since World War II. Yet no member of the media is curious how it started or where it started, or who was involved. They're not curious. So, that's how bad it is. But I do try to go where the information leads me. Every project I've looked into, I've been open-minded, and it leads to some places like Tallahassee, the Diamond Eugene, or it leads to, Michelle Obama has a completely different story than anybody could have imagined. I talked to her, for example, her thesis professor. Her thesis was very famous. It came out 2008 campaign. She made one comment that people stopped and didn't read the whole thing. And, she made a comment about she never felt so black as she did being at Princeton. And what people didn't realize, it was because she was in the sociology department in the African American studies, where she was being hammered by lectures that you're separate because you're black, is what they were being taught. And she never experienced that. She never experienced racism or any problem. So that's why she said, I never felt so black in my life. It wasn't because of the students. It was because of the degree and her professors, who I spoke to, her professor, thesis professor, for hours. Right. And she goes on to say, I identify with my white classmates. I have conservative values. I want to go get a job and make money. So she actually rejected all of that and never was involved in anything racial. She went to live in the nicest area in Chicago with white neighbors. She went to be an elite at the University of Chicago, worked for Mayor Daley. She had nothing to do with worrying about the plight of black people. Only when they needed the political power did she spin these stories for Barack, who was considered a white guy, to try to get black people on board. So it's very manipulative. And Michelle Obama is looking to, I think, be the nominee, and she's spinning race stories. Look at her Twitter. She spins racial stories, but if you look at her real history, it's complete fabrication.
Joel, another personality trait that I see, and one that is rare, is courage. You have the willingness to take on difficult topics and process them to the end, despite the negative effects that it may have on you or your career. You are totally objective about it, and that takes, and especially in our society, where people are afraid to speak out, We have freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is guaranteed in our Constitution, but the worst kind of pressure is pressure that you put on yourself to not speak, all right?
Look, I've had people say to me like, well, I envy you because at least you can try to do something. Well, I have this quote that I've said that, take any risk to expose the truth because America is worth it. And I believe in that. And I came across obstacles that I didn't expect. I had when I came out with my film on Obama, the IRS opened up my tax returns and said they denied all my business expenses. It was like ridiculous. My accountant said, this is a joke. I'll go and fight this. I couldn't take business expenses. So we beat that one down. Then I was investigated by the FEC because someone complained about my movie about Obama. I had to hire a lawyer and go through an investigation about this film. I have a media exemption. I'm a member of the media. I make films. That's what I do. And so it's like CNN. You can't be investigated by the FEC because you put out a film.
FEC is the Federal Election Commission,
right,
that investigates people who are using their funds or
violating
power
election
to
laws.
violate election laws.
Yeah, you know, if I just showed up and made a film about Obama and distributed it in a certain way, and I've never done that before, you might have a case. You're supposed to report who funded you. Mm-hmm. But I've been making films for 20 years about all kind of, and a public speaker and writer.
That's your profession.
Right. It's called a media exemption, like Michael Moore, you know. So I got investigated by the FEC, and shockingly, when they voted whether or not to refer me to the Justice Department, the vote was tied 3-3. The 3 Republicans said no, and the 3 Democrats wanted to refer me to the Justice Department
for prosecution.
Yeah, so the thing died because it was tied 3-3, and the 3 Republicans on the FEC all wrote separate opinions excoriating the Democrats for trying to overturn the media exemption. That's basically eliminate the media. So I did win at the FEC.
But it costs you money.
Cost me money.
And it costs you time.
And money.
That causes most people to say, it's not worth it.
Now, look, the whole Mueller investigation, you know, I know people that spent thousands and thousands. I mean, you know, I knew Roger Stone, and I had worked with, I made a film called Danny Williams, The Untold Story of Danny Williams, which was Bill Clinton's black son that looked just like him. And he told the story about how, you know, his mother was a prostitute and Bill's his father. We made a little short film about that. And, you know, that was scrutinized by the Mueller folks. And, you know, I even got a subpoena from the FBI, believe it or not, to go testify about in the Mueller investigation. Then they never called me. You know, I got this thing. But it's pretty intimidating. You're just walking out of your house and some guy walks up in jeans and a T-shirt, says, "Hi, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, hi." He says, "Here, I got this subpoena for you." "Oh, my God. You know, what do you want?" You know, "Do you know Roger Stone?" "Well, yeah." You know, "You have to show up at the grand jury next week." "Oh, my God." But then they didn't call me. So I know a lot of people that if you you know, come out with films or books or an opinion, they'll go after you. And, you know, what are you going to do? You got to go where the truth leads you.
Joel, it's remarkable. Your work is remarkable. Your perseverance, your courage is remarkable. And I want to thank you for your work. And, of course, thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dr. Bob.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.